Okay, here we go. Power rankings. And before I start the power rankings, I just want to quickly say that I do apologize the fact that the camera is a little bit blurry. I noticed in my last video it was very blurry, and I don't know why that is the case. And maybe this is a sign of me just want to get a new camera pretty soon in the future, or the fact is that the position of my camera is not very good, and that is the reason why it's very blurry. Or maybe it's the lighting of the room, I'm not quite sure. So maybe I will kind of experiment in the next couple of episodes to see what is a way to make sure that the quality of these video are not going to be very blurry, because at the end of the day I want to produce good video. I don't want to produce these kind of blurry kind of videos and stuff like that. But yeah, meanwhile, let's move on into the power rankings. And the beauty about this week power rankings is that since we haven't done a power rankings in 2 weeks, that means that there is going to be a couple of teams that had either took dramatic kind of rise to the power rankings because they have won a couple of games in a row, or they took a dramatic drop in the power ranking because they lost a couple of games in a row. But one thing for sure, this team at the bottom is going to stay the same as they were in my last power rankings, is the Chicago Fire, who still have not got a win ever since my last power rankings, and they haven't got a win ever since probably 5 episodes ago of my power rankings. I mean, 8 in a row that the Fire has now lost, and it's just, I don't know what to say other than the fact that this is not only becoming a time where they're out of the playoff race, but this is a complete lost season and a complete disappointment of what happened last year when they actually did make the playoffs and actually finished third in the standings. So yeah, Chicago of course are going to be in dead last, and they'll probably be in dead last for a while unless they start to win games. And in 22nd, this team dropped 1 spot from last week, and that of course is Houston. And for Houston, it has been a miserable last couple of weeks, and some will say that they've been kind of robbed a couple of times of the bad refereeing decision that is against them. But when you been doing throughout this whole season of just doing nothing but blowing leads late in the game and conceding goals late in the game, yeah, that is what can happen. And in the last game, that was probably, I would say, of all the blown leads that Houston has so far this season, the last game against RSL was the worst. I mean, they were up 1-0 and they were heading into stoppage time. They were 3 minutes away from getting all 3 points. And yet, somehow, in some way, they not only did not draw that game, but they actually lost that game. I mean, I don't think of 99 out of 100 times, if any team plays in that situation where you're up 1-0 and you have 3 minutes left before the game ends, 99 out of 100 times that team either gets a win or a draw. But to get a loss like that, that is a very rare thing, or you have to have some massive collapse, and that's what Houston just did in that last game. And also the previous game when they lose to the Columbus Crew, that also didn't help their favor in terms of trying to get back into the playoff race. But in 21st, this team goes up 1 spot from last week, and that of course is Orlando. So, this was a one that I didn't really want to do, which is move Orlando City up, because before they had this bye week, this week they actually lost their game, and because of the fact that Houston dropped both of those games, Orlando City gets the benefit of the doubt that they are able to move 1 spot up. But don't take this as a good kind of thing, Orlando City fans, because your team is still very bad. And that defense is just probably the worst defense in the league in terms of the statistic wise and maybe the overall wise. And if Orlando City does not snap out of this funk that they've been in, which is one win in 12 games or 13 games or something like that, it's been a very, very long, miserable kind of run that Orlando City have endured. This team is not going to make the playoffs, and that would be a huge disappointment after what they did in the offseason. But in 20th, and this team stays at the same spot, and that, of course, is the Quakes. So the Quakes, of course, lose to the Rapids, but they did drew to TFC at home. And, some people will say I shouldn't move the Quakes down because of that Rapids loss. But, again, because of the fact that Houston lost both of their games and Orlando City didn't play in this, and I thought we actually looked pretty decent in that TFC game. And really, the only thing that we did not look very decent was our finishing. And that is pretty much the reason why we did not win that one. If we would have been much better in terms of finishing, if we would have just took our chances in that game, which we had a lot, we should have won that game. We should have got our first win at home since March. And it's hard to believe that this streak of us not winning at home is now almost approaching half a year. I mean, I don't think ever in my life that I could be a Quakes fan and say that we can have one season where we can go half a year without winning at home, especially how the last couple of years has gone, and how, despite the fact that the Quakes have not done very well, one thing that they have done very well is that they're able to get wins at Avaya Stadium. But nowadays they just don't do that anymore. I mean, they not only are unable to get wins, but they're losing games and drawing games, and it's no wonder why every time when I go to the game, it's getting to a point where there's just no atmosphere at the stadium, and that I'm seeing a lot of empty seats because, it's almost like guaranteed that when you go to the game, you're not going to see a win because of how this streak is. But in all seriousness, I really want this streak to end. I mean, it's been a miserable season, but all I want right now, besides the fact that I want to see Wando break that all-time record, I at least, for the end of this season, at least get a chance to see the Quakes win again. And we have a big opportunity to do that against the Whitecaps, a team that we have done pretty well against, either at home or away. But in 19th position, and this team dropped 4 spots from last week, and that, of course, is the Refs. And the Refs, well, just like Orlando City and Chicago, they are losing hope in terms of them actually potentially make the playoffs. And this bad run that they've been going through ever since the start of June just keeps on continue, and it just feels like the Refs are not only not going to make the playoffs, but they might be dropping down to a spot where they're not even going to be competing anymore. And when you look at this team, it looked like it's finally shown that this Refs team is what we kind of expected. I mean, we all expect this Refs team to not have a lot of good kind of quality in their team. And I really think the first 2 months when they were doing very well, that was kind of overachievement. But it just feels like right now, when you look at this bad stretch that they're on and the way that they've been playing, it's kind of what I expected from the Refs. And, as much as the Refs fans are not happy the fact that they are going to miss the playoffs, well, it's kind of what everybody expected. And in some way, they kind of fool you a little bit back in May, saying that you were in a good kind of run and overachieving, and it turns out that was just complete fool's gold. But yeah, the Refs, of course, being in the 19th position, and in 18th place, this team lost 9 spots and actually tied with the biggest drop in my power rankings. And that, of course, is none other than the Galaxy. I mean, where do I begin with the Galaxy? Drew against Minnesota at home, drew against Colorado Rapids at home, and then lost 5-0 against the Seattle Sounder. and they give up 5 goals against the team that has the worst attacking and the worst goal scoring record in the league. I mean, that is just incredible. And right now, the Galaxy, with the way that they've been playing right now, there is a really high possibility that this team is not going to make the playoffs. I mean, right now, if this team does not sort it out, if Zlatan doesn't continue to kind of carry this team on the attacking end, this team is doomed. I mean, the defense is just, it's woeful. And I think woeful is kind of a kind way to say the Galaxy defense. It is just getting so bad now that, not only the fans are questioning on the defense, but they're also questioning the whole coaching staff and also the player and even the ownership of this team. And, like I said, the Galaxy, it's been a horrible week for them, and only getting 2 points out of those 3 games where you were playing 2 of the weakest team in the Western Conference, and then you were also playing a Seattle Sounders team that, although they've been very hot, you shouldn't be able to just completely gift them that game and just ship them 5 goals like that. So the Galaxy, of course, moved down to 18th position. I think this is probably the lowest that they have been, and really, I really think this is probably rock bottom for this Galaxy team. I know it was kind of rock bottom for them a couple of months ago when they were looking outside in, but I really think now it is kind of rock bottom again because of how bad that defense is and how that goal scoring kind of threat for the Galaxy is started to show some wear and tear, and that the goals that they're scoring is not going to bail them out in terms of how woeful that defense and that back line is. And in 17th position, this team stays at the same spot, and that, of course, is Minnesota. So Minnesota, of course, started their 5-game brutal kind of road stretch with a draw against the Galaxy, but then they lost against FC Dallas, and that loss probably will just cement their hopes of making the playoffs. I mean, I just don't see Minnesota any chance of making the playoffs with the way that you look at the rest of this road schedule and how brutal it is. I mean, the reason why I still put them where they are is because they did get a result against the Galaxy, and other team around them did much worse than what Minnesota did. But even though I didn't drop them, I don't think Minnesota fans should take that as a good thing, because I really still think that this team is not going to make the playoffs with how bad the rest of the schedule is and how tough it is. It's going to be a miracle for them to potentially get back into the playoff race. And in 16th place, this team also stay at the same spot, and that, of course, is the Rapids. So this one is a bit of a controversial one because I probably maybe should have put the Rapids at least one spot up and moved them up in the power rankings, because they did beat the Quakes, they did drew against the Galaxy, and they did lose to LAFC in a game that they really fought very hard. But they were playing 2 very easy teams, and when they did play against a real team, it kind of shows of how they just are not there yet. And I think 16th spot is a pretty high mark for Colorado, considering the fact that I've been putting the Rapids very kind of low in the power rankings throughout the season. So yeah, I don't think Rapids fans should be complaining the fact that I didn't move them up, despite the fact that they did have a pretty good week. They did get 4 points out of those 3 games, but still, like I said before, I think the Rapids are just not there in terms of the other team that is above them, and the fact that they, in that LAFC game, like I said, they probably show you why they are not there to potentially move on into the next level. But in 15th place, this team moved up 3 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Philly. And what a week it's been for Philly. I mean, in the last game, they picked up a massive win against NYCFC, and I think that probably could be a win that will really define their season, considering the fact that they are one of those teams that is trying to hang on to those last two spots. And because they beat a big opponent, that really puts the pressure on the other playoff team. And I really think with the way that the Union are playing right now, this team look like they're bound to make the playoffs. I mean, right now, I think that despite the fact that at times the Union did not look very good, now it looks like this team has finally kind of got together. Certainly the attacking force is still kind of a little bit lacking in terms of the clinical goal scoring finish, but it feels like the midfield and the defense of this Union team is so much better than it is. And this is probably the best we have seen the Union play all season long, and if they can continue this kind of good run, they're definitely going to be finishing in that fifth spot, or even in that sixth spot, or even making the playoffs this year. And in 14th place, this team also didn't move anywhere in my power rankings, and it's another bit of a controversial one. So the Whitecaps, of course, they did beat Portland last week, and then they of course this week drew 2-2 against the Red Bulls. And I know a Whitecaps fan would say that I shouldn't move them up because they beat the Timbers and they beat them on the road. But the thing is, like what I said about the Rapids, this is a team that is kind of in a situation where they're kind of like right where they're supposed to be. And with the fact that the other team around them have also won and also did something that is kind of more impressive than what the Whitecaps did. I mean, I think if the Whitecaps would have got that win against the Red Bulls, then there is no doubt I'm moving them up. I mean, when they get a 6-pointer from the Red Bulls and the Timbers on the road, then they're definitely going to deserve to move up. But because of the fact that they didn't do that, I'm just going to put them right at the same spot. And they also, that game that against the Red Bulls, that was a game that was at home. And that is a game where you should be able to potentially get all 3 points, even though they're playing against a Red Bulls team that is very good. And especially the fact that you were leading so late in the game and you were also up a man for the last 5 minutes and you still somehow find a way to blow it. But in 13th place, this team also didn't move anywhere. And that, of course, is the Impact. So, the Impact, obviously, they got a draw against DC United, which definitely, that was a very bad draw for them because that was a team that they should be able to get something out of. But they did kind of bounce back by beating Chicago 2-1, although it wasn't a very impressive performance, and they barely got out of that one with all 3 points. And have they not won that one, then I might think about dropping them and moving Vancouver up, because you cannot drop points against easy team at home when you know that you are in a dogfight right now with other team, and you're a team that is just playing the most game out of all the other team that is fighting for those final 2 spots in the Eastern Conference. So for the Impact, they're still kind of not in a very good position, but at least it could have been much worse if they would have drew against Chicago. If they drew against Chicago, then they're in big trouble in terms of actually potentially making the playoffs, considering the fact that they have those big team that is gonna chase them down and getting some points over them. But as I said, the Impact, of course, in that 13th spot, and didn't really make any spot up or drop any spot this week. And in 12th place, this team is tied with the biggest mover, and that, of course, is DC United. And there shouldn't be no surprise why DC United is the biggest mover. I mean, when you are a team that had 3 games in 7 days and you won all 3 of them, yeah, you deserve to be the biggest mover. And yes, all 3 of those games were at home and they didn't have to travel anywhere, but it's still very impressive considering how DC United was kind of been playing, and that I really think this is probably the best DC United has been playing all season long. And this team, you better believe this team is charging up and want to get those last two spots off of Philly and Montreal. And although they still need to do a lot more, this 9 points out of those 3 games in this 9 point week, I still think that they're still not enough to potentially get themselves in a serious kind of conversation of making the playoffs. But you better believe this team is in a good form. And when this team is in a good form, they can continue to win games. Then one of those teams, most likely Montreal, have to be very, very scared right now, because DC United has 4 games over Montreal. And if they made up all those 4 games and they win all 4 of those games, then DC would be in the playoffs right now. But in 11th place, this team didn't move any spot, and that, of course, is RSL. So I would have dropped RSL spot if they would have lost that game against the Dynamo, but because they didn't lose the game against the Dynamo, and they did lose their midweek game and then drew at home against Montreal, that's why I decided not to move them up. And I know RSL fan would say that I should move them up after kind of a miraculous comeback they did against Houston. Yeah, you look at the other games that has happened in the midweek games and also in the game last week, they did not look very good whatsoever. Although that win for RSL is certainly a very big win for them, because I think now they're in a little bit better possession in terms of them potentially making the playoffs. I still think that they're still in this kind of really kind of tight position, kind of like in this little bubble of them potentially making the playoffs or not. But it really just all depends on what they do from the rest on out when they do play those games on the road. They need to get some road points, and they need to win every single home games for now. Any more drop points at home just puts much more pressure on the road for them. And in 10th place, and this team is also tied with the Galaxy as the biggest loser, and that, of course, is Portland. So in my last power rankings, I put Portland at top because they had that 15-game unbeaten streak. But now I have moved them back down and almost dropped them outside of the top 10. And the reason why that is the case is because they lost 3 in a row. And yes, I know it was a very tough stretch where they had to go all the way across the other side of the country to play against DC United, and then had to travel to Sporting KC. And that obviously is a murderous row. But when you lose 3 in a row, and especially you're kind of one of those teams that is near the top of my power rankings, yeah, that usually means that you are going to be dropping down. I mean, if you have already seen my power rankings, you can tell that the more that you're near the top part of the table, the more that you can have a chance of actually dropping down in my power rankings, because other teams behind you are hungry to try to climb up, and if other team around you have been able to get a win and you didn't, then you are of course going to be dropping down in my power rankings. And that's what Portland did in these last 3 games by losing all 3 of those games. And yeah, they're now back down in 10th place, and they're actually now in 6th place in the Western Conference, and they're actually not that far away from dropping below the red line. I mean, it's hard to believe, but Portland, they went from looking comfortable in 2nd place only to lose 3 in a row, and now they could potentially fall out of the playoff line. Again, the Western Conference and that playoff picture look very, very tight right now. Teams are just all jumbled up right now in the Western Conference. But in 9th place, this team dropped 6 spots from last week, and that, of course, is TFC. And for TFC, it's been a pretty rough week for them. Well, I wouldn't say it's been a pretty rough week. It's been a pretty rough week for them in the league, but it's been a good week in terms of them clinching that spot in CCL after winning the Canadian Championship. But still, it's a bit of a tough week for them in the league, consider they lost to NYCFC, and then they got a red card from Josie Altidore, and then they travel all the way across the other side of the country and play against the worst team in the league, that is my Quakes team, and they drew in that one. And that is going to be a resort that could come back to haunt TFC in terms of if they do miss out the playoffs, because the Quakes were by far the most easiest team that they could have beat in this kind of resurgence that they're trying to do in the second half of the season to make the playoffs. And yet, they failed to get all 3 points in that game, and they, of course, dropped 6 spots from last week. In 8th place, and this team stays at the same spot as last week, or 2 weeks ago, is NYCFC. So, it's pretty simple reason of why NYCFC stay at the same spot. They won their game against TFC, only to lose against the Union the following week. And when you do that, it's pretty much an even kind of streak, and they, of course, will be staying at the same place as where they are right now. Although that loss against the Union is really, really going to hurt their chances of making the Supporters' Shield's race, and that it's an absolute must-win for them when they play against the Red Bulls this midweek in the New York Derby if they want to stay in the Supporters' Shield race. And in 7th place, this team moved up 3 spots from last week, and that, of course, is LAFC. So, despite the fact that LAFC lost their first ever game at Bank of California Stadium against Sporting KC, they did rebound by winning against Colorado and also RSL, and yeah, they of course move up from 3 spots, and I think they're now up to 3rd place in the Western Conference. In 6th place, this team stays at the same spot as last week, and that of course is FC Dallas. So, FC Dallas of course won their game against Minnesota, but I think they also drew their last game against I kind of forgot who exactly they play in the last game, but nevertheless, they of course stays at the same spot as last week. Actually, I'm just gonna cheat a little bit and actually check to see who they face. Oh, they face against the Seattle Sounders, and they lost that one. Okay, so that's pretty much the reason why they stay at the same spot, because like the NYCFC reason, if you lose one game and you won one game in those 2 games during the 2 weeks spell, then you are going to be staying at the same place as you were. And in 5th place, it's going to be Columbus, who moves up 2 spots. And I know the fact that Columbus did lose against Atlanta, and they win against Houston. You would think, why wouldn't I do the same thing with FC Dallas and NYCFC, where they should not be moving up? Well, the thing is, Columbus did actually look very good in that Atlanta game, but it's just the fact that they kind of got outclassed in the end. And whenever you go on the road and you play against Atlanta, it's always going to be very tough. So, because of that, I give them that benefit of the doubt, and it was a good win against the Dynamos, and yeah, that's why I moved them up 2 spots. And in 4th place, this team moved up 7 spots from last week, also tying with DC United as the biggest mover, is Sporting KC. So this has been the first week since probably week 18 or 16 that I put Sporting KC this high in the table. Remember, I usually used to put Sporting KC right around the top 5 throughout this season's power rankings, but because of how bad they were in that July spell, that's why I decided to move them back down a lot. But now that they're back on track and got 3 straight clean sheets, then that is the reason why Sporting KC are now back to where they are. And you can even see it in the standings too, as they're now moving up to 2nd in the standings, and they certainly want to try to get that top spot back from FC Dallas. And yeah, Sporting KC back up to 4th place. And in 3rd place, this team dropped 1 spot from last week, and that of course is the Red Bulls. And it could have been worse for the Red Bulls if they did not able to beat or drew against Vancouver. If they didn't drew to Vancouver, then I would have moved them down to 4th place and moved Sporting KC up. But they did drew against them, and at least they kind of salvaged something out of that game. But then again, you know, when you play against the Whitecaps, and if you're in a Supporters Shield race like they are in right now, they need to win that game. And in 2nd place, this team moved up 2 spots from last week, or 2 weeks ago, is the Sounders, who is right now the hottest team in MLS right now, with 6 straight wins. And this is a team that is just very close from getting above the red line. In fact, if one of those 6th place team, which I think it's going to be RSL, lose another game and Seattle wins another one, then Seattle will overtake RSL. And in fact, this week, Seattle actually did overtake RSL for a moment. And RSL, if they did not get that last minute kind of winner against Houston, then the Sounders would be above the playoff line for the first time this season. And you better believe that when they do make it above that red line, they are not just going to contend of just staying barely above that red line. They are going to move up in the table. But in 1st place, and this team is back in 1st place after having a long stint of that before it got taken away by Portland 2 weeks ago in my last power rankings. It's Atlanta, who, you know, right now they're leading the Supporters Shield race. They're top in the East. They're the best team in the league. And this is still the team to beat for everybody. And I think this is definitely going to be a team that I really think if any Eastern Conference team or any team want to win the MLS Cup, then it has to come by going to Atlanta and hopefully knocking them down to able to win that MLS Cup. But either way, that is it for my power rankings. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the power rankings? Did I rank a couple of teams too high, or did I rank a couple of teams too low? But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this power rankings. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I will see you guys next time.